If you want to get into the very lucrative part of maintaining and publishing podcasts to either promote your copywriting services or to deliver as an actual service to clients, then pays close attention. I'm going to share with you today the difference between producing a podcast for yourself versus producing it for your clients, and some of the tips and tricks that are going to help you do this effectively. I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips. So I have a number of podcasts that I use to promote my membership site, paid newsletter, and consulting services. Now, the membership site is the collection location for all of my content, my lessons and teachings that I provide clients over the years. And it is a library of materials that I charge admission to because it's useful materials. And the reason it's useful materials is because I've created evergreen content. That means it's content that works now as well as it has in the past, because it's not tied to any current political activity or any current specific examples or specific software. So that content is not designed to sell you the use of software. It's to show you how to do things no matter what software you have. Now, that's a very good podcast format, but it's an even better training and educational format. Now, I use podcasts, which are periodic, short-form presentations. So this is a podcast. I'm going to present to you the opportunity. I'm going to present to you some of the problems and challenges people face. Then I'm going to share with you a few strategies to address those problems. And at the end, I'll give you a way to ask questions. So it's not a complete treatment to the topic, but it's going to give you a general idea of the differences between podcasts you might do for yourself and podcasts you might do for your clients. Now, when you're doing a podcast for yourself, of course, it's going to promote your business, but it's also going to establish your expertise and credibility in the marketplace. And that's why I told you I've been doing podcasts for 20 some years, and I've actually used the format long before it was called podcasts. But my intention was to develop short programs that can go into a library like chapters in a larger book and to be evergreen in nature. Meaning, again, the content's as good this year as it will be 5 years from now. I'm not chasing trends. Now, if you want a podcast for popularity, then you will have some episodes that chase trends. Like there are some episodes where I've talked about Donald Trump, or I've talked about Obama, or I've talked about the current political thing, and those are useful, but they're even more useful if I had a product to sell within those lines. So, if you're doing a podcast for an insurance agency, maybe you're writing their scripts, you're helping them with the assembly, maybe you're doing an interview to get the content, and then ultimately you're finishing the publishing and posting it online. That's one of the things that my team can do for you on a white label basis, or my team can do, it does in general for our clients. So a lot of subject matter experts don't have the skill, time, or interest in going through and recording and presenting and writing and promoting and loading and all that stuff. So you can do that for them. But the general concept of the show itself isn't just sitting down and talking about any old thing. It really is a space advertisement. But an insurance agent who's selling a product could talk about current events to make the podcast more popular. So a topic they may cover is not why insurance is important, but in the case of the upcoming storms, as it is hurricane season, what are insurance things you need to know before hurricane season? They can talk about the some insurance companies backing out of storms in Florida, and they're selling insurance in Colorado. And so they're giving a example of why you want to work with a reputable company. And then at the end of their show, they're going to offer to schedule an appointment to go over the client's insurance portfolio. So it's going to be a little bit different there, that the podcast you do for a client can be very, very tied to current and local events, because they're going to keep hiring you back to write more scripts. And those podcasts will work, but they'll only work in the time frame of the event that they're discussing. Where when I create podcasts for myself, or you as a copywriter create podcasts for generating business, the concept of copy doesn't really change. So why you might have insurance will never change, and that's evergreen content. But a client can have as much as 50% current affairs content to be interesting, commentary, that kind of stuff. I really don't think the service providers should have more than 50% commentary, because again, I see the podcast as going out there onto a network and being there for years to come. And somebody had told me this in the past, and I don't have their name off the top of my head, but the podcast gives someone a chance to come in and listen to one episode or listen to 5 episodes. And if each episode is relevant to their current needs, positions you as an expert, and then offers something of value that is like a newsletter or something that's always going to be there, then that person can come to your site, sign up and become a lead. And then in your in-house email newsletter, you can talk about current affairs and you can tie that to existing promotions, activities, and events. So if the public-facing content is all time specific, a prospect may come and listen to that content and feel like they've gotten content that is out of date. And so again, that's why we record evergreen content for ourselves as service providers. But when we get a client, we'll actually do as much as 50% of their content with current news and affairs. Because a client selling insurance, legal services, plumbing and electric, their product is constantly changing. So an electrician may have a new energy-saving device or a whole house surge protector or a new generator that is new, and their clients want new. And so in order to be new, you have to use current events to be relevant. Where as copywriters, it really is just headline, first paragraph. It's fundamentals. It's not going to change. The media might change, and yes, you may add a few current affairs things, but at the rate and speed at which the internet changes, there is a risk talking about YouTube because YouTube might not be around in 5-10 years. And just like if I did a bunch of social media, if I talked about specific social media and I was talking about MySpace and Reddit and Usenet groups, people today wouldn't know what I was talking about, because there's Facebook, Instagram, and other platforms. So a lot of copywriters run into the problem where they get too niche specific and they drill down, and now their content is tied to a external product or service or tied to an external event. And what this causes is that your content starts losing value. So because all of my content is evergreen, because it all interconnects and webs together, I can produce something today and it still be relevant 5 or 6 years from now. So I'm at the point in my career where I have a library of content where I'm just constantly rewriting the same content and maybe presenting it a little bit better. So maybe I recorded a podcast and the sound wasn't so good, so I have it transcribed and then I turn it into a special report. Maybe it's not suitable for a special report, so I chop it up into a bunch of feature articles or a bunch of short blog posts. So I'm doing the work once and getting value out of it over time. Now, that concept of recycle your marketing, which I've taught in many programs, you can use with your clients as well. So maybe you've been doing podcasts for them over the years, and you go back to all your podcast clients and you say, hey, here's a great idea, is you can take your podcasts, transcribe them, and then I'll turn them, you as the service provider, I'll turn them into special reports, blog posts, and feature content. And you can explain to them how that'll save them time because they don't have to create new content, and the importance of extracting the evergreen value of their old content and ultimately putting old wine in new bottles. Now, of course, you have to make sure it's relevant because our clients have changing industries, new ideas and concepts, and so you can use that to refresh the old content, but ultimately it has to be still factually relevant, still position them as an expert. But again, if you're in an age-old activity such as advertising or marketing, almost 100% of what I do can be evergreen content. It's not going to hurt anything. But I wrap around that evergreen content the current affairs and issues. So if you're on my newsletter, you're going to see current affairs type items. You're going to see a short email that says, they're doing such and such, and this new tool came out, but this still works. Click here for the details. So I'm constantly bridging back to my evergreen content, or I'm reassembling my evergreen content into courses or materials, but I've only had to create it one time. I'm not constantly chasing the next shiny object. Now again, you'll make more money with a client moderating their chasing of a shining object, but you don't want to cut it off completely because, again, laws change. If you're working for a lawyer, the current state of law is going to change. So if 50% of their content is about why you would hire a lawyer, what are the key things you might do with asset protection, what are the key things you might do here, what are common mistakes, that's your evergreen materials. But that there might be a new law coming out, like Congress could be talking about a new law, and so the lawyer may need to connect that new law with the potential impact for their clients. And then that would be interesting podcast material because it'd be more of a news podcast rather than an educational podcast. But it serves the purpose of priming recency or priming relevance, that conversation going on in the mind of a prospect, and then putting it in a podcast issue where you can make an offer. Now, again, just because my content is evergreen doesn't mean it's not relevant to current situations or changing environments. But I choose to wrap around it my marketing to make it more relevant rather than recording programs that are specific to what's going on right now. Now, podcasting is a technology that's been around in the 1900s, 1800s, because it's basically short-term syndicated or short-term serial audio content or video content. The concept is called podcasting today, but in the past it would be called having your own radio program. And a lot of times you saw religious news stations do you'll have the Hour of Power, for example, with Norman Vincent Peale. I think it was Norman Vincent Peale. But basically, podcasting isn't anything new, but it's the term you recognize. And what I'm basically doing is, like you can listen to Reverend Ike or excerpts from Reverend Ike's sermons today, and they'll still be relevant to people. And so I'm basically copying a model that was used in the evangelical community to prophesize copywriting, but also to make those materials last for as long as possible. So let me go over how I'm publishing in-house versus how I would publish for a client. So we agree client content can be very specific to current events, but no more than 50% of their content, because we want to have this trail, this value, this anchor of evergreen content. In my environment, the majority of what I record is evergreen because I have a strategy of wrapping around the current events. So what I'll do is I'll record a podcast from an outline. I'll just write up an outline based on an idea. I'll talk about the problems, the pains, the challenges, the frustrations. In this case, many times your clients are chasing the latest thing, and they're creating podcast episodes all over the place, and they're not generating leads, and they blame that on podcasting rather than poor targeting. And what we do to fix that is we narrow them down to a outline of key topics that are tied to key products and services, and then we put offers in place. I have that library, but when I sit down to do a podcast, I'll take an outline, I'll take a key idea, I'll go through it, and then I will offer a evergreen product, which is go to the website and ask your questions. It tends to work pretty well for me. Now, I could offer a special report, but what I found in the past when I offered topical related special reports is that the landing page would break, or there'd be a problem with the way you request the report, like my phone number would change or my address would change. Now, again, I've been doing this for 23 years. I might have the same phone number for 5 years. I think I've had the 800 number for almost 10 years now. But in the course of recycling materials, then I've got to pay somebody to edit out the old phone number and put in the new phone number, or drive somebody to a web page. So I just switched over to, and I don't know how many years ago, but I switched over to just simply sending you someone to the website. Now, again, if you Google Justin Hits, if you Google ad briefings, if I've got enough presence out there that you'll be able to find me. What I don't do is send somebody to social media. I don't send somebody to my LinkedIn. I don't send somebody outside my ecosystem, because once they're listening to the podcast, they're on my media. So I'll record a podcast off an outline, and then I'll come back and set up title tests. So the podcast title, original title, is just kind of, a guess based on past experience. What would the title get the most attention? What's relevant to the content? But I'll come back later and test the title. The description, I'll write a long form description initially, and then later I'll wind that down to a short-term description. I'll put a backlink in the description, and that backlink will be not coded initially. And then once I get the coding straight, I'll put the coding in. What I'm doing is I'm getting something in front of my audience as consistently as possible, and then I'm coming back later and worrying about the search engine. So my assumption is, and my analytics show me, that there's a certain number of listeners who listen to the podcast within 24 hours of its original publication. So in-house, I create the publication as quickly as I can based on solid materials. I offer to answer questions. Sometimes I don't get any questions. Sometimes I get one or two questions, but they always go to the same place for the questions, the main website. That works great because I can come back in 15 days, I can come back in 30 days, and I can keep editing the descriptions and the titles until that particular podcast has a pretty consistent flow of traffic. Because I'd rather have 100 podcasts each bringing in 50 to 100 listeners every month than only my latest podcasts bringing in 1,000 or 2,000 visitors in the first 30 days. I stretch out my long tail, in a sense, by having a lot of content that is high value, evergreen, and drives back to the main website. Now, if you're producing for a client, and when I produce for a client, you need a little more finished material on the first publish, because the client is going to see that podcast as an advertisement, and they're going to only be considering the first 30 days. To them, it gets old after the first 30 days. And if it's topical content that's tied to current events, then it's definitely old after 30 days. But that is necessary because they can then make offers. So they can have their a special landing page associated with the podcast, and they can send everybody to that landing page, or they can make the offer of to schedule an appointment, or their book, for example. Books tend to be a bit evergreen, but they're going to be covering one topic, and they're going to be looking at the first 30 days. So you need to make sure you have a good title, a good description, good coded backlinks, and then also keyword sets associated with it when that podcast publishes. Now, that's a lot easier to do when I'm getting paid by a client to do it, because I can assemble all those things in advance, provide it as a deliverable, and put it online. But when I'm doing it in-house, I am literally recording on my iPad or on some kind of device and sending it right out straight to the network with the minimal amount of copy, and then I work on the next recording. I might be recording 5 or 10 podcasts at one time. Now, in a studio environment, again, you can bring a client into a studio. You can record 5 or 10 podcasts once they get a hang of doing the presentations. Then you send it all off to the editing while you're doing the writing, and then all of it comes back together and you deliver a package to the client. That's not how it works in-house, because you don't have the time and resources to do that. And then as soon as you're able to get a client with billable hours, you're going to rather have billable hours than what you do in-house, because in-house is overhead. And so, again, evergreen content in-house that just builds on the principles, always sends to the same offer, and then the clients will get on your mailing list, and then in-house, you're going to have topical offers and seasonal related content. But for your clients interacting with a general marketplace, especially a consumer market, where their podcast is going to be among news channels especially, then about half of their content is going to be topical, seasonal, and tied to their industry, changes in their industry, high level of relevance. I'm not saying that my evergreen content doesn't have relevance, but I don't need to have, 5 speaking mistakes that Donald Trump makes when he gets in front of an audience, and 3 mistakes that Biden makes. I don't need to have that. I can talk about 5 speaking mistakes that copywriters make when they're working with clients. And so can you see how this is a little bit different for yourself? And if you go through all the details to make it perfect for yourself, you're going to miss that long-term flow of exponential growth by having your content that you made once be in front of the maximum number of prospects over time, versus what a client's going to expect is they want to have a viral post every time. Every time they get something from you and you put it online, they're going to want to have the maximum number of viewers immediately. They don't understand that long-term thing. And that's fine, because you're going to come back next week and the week afterwards and the week after that to help them produce more content. But you can't afford to do that. If I had to, I think I've got 500 or 600 podcasts. If I had to sit down and write perfect descriptions right out the bat for every one of those, none of that stuff would ever got published. And so today I can throw it out there like spaghetti. I can go through and do my headline testing, and then I talked about my topic testing methodologies. I can apply the methodologies that we use to optimize content. I can use it as demonstration to my clients. I can say, look, I published all these podcasts. If you just throw podcasts online, yes, you're going to get some viewers, but here's what we did to increase the traffic. And then I can show the traffic increases on my content. And that way, I'm not violating any privacy stuff. I'm not messing up an NDA. And then the client can see, oh, well, yeah, he knows how to optimize content. And then when they say, hey, why didn't you just do that in the first place? Because they're in their mind, they're questioning, because they don't want to go through all the trouble that I went through. You could explain to them, well, when we work with clients, here's how we do it and here's why. And the reason we have a finished package for the client is because we can still do optimization later, but when you put that out, we're going to add on additional marketing. So for a client, every podcast that gets published, there'll be a notice on an email list somewhere. There'll be pay-per-click advertising. There'll be social media posts. I don't do that for every podcast that I produce in-house. It's a lot of effort. That if I have billable work, why would I spend all that effort in-house? Do you see what I mean? Now, a client who needs scale isn't going to want to be piecemeal. And they shouldn't be piecemeal, because a client who can afford scale will benefit faster from that layered promotion, where I can only handle so many clients. And then, of course, the content we put up on the newsletters and stuff is being consumed by buyers. So I have a pool of buyers already that I can keep putting content in front of and satisfying them. In fact, if you're a member, the new content you're expecting to be educational rather than current affairs and events and not educational. So again, in-house is going to be different than what you're going to do for clients. There are benefits to what we do in-house, and it pays to do it that way, but it's a long game. Clients are going to expect a short game, and in order to get the short game, you need more complete packages. It means and you might have 2 headlines for them to choose from, and then, of course, the body copy, and then some offers, hashtags, keywords, all of that. Now, lastly, what is the same between the two is the syndication. So I put my podcast up on a platform that syndicates it to like 27 different platforms. I get traffic from all over the place. If it was coded earlier, I'd know where the traffic came from. Okay? It's not coded earlier, so I don't know where the traffic comes from. But if you do this for a client, you need to know where the traffic comes from so that you get credit for the attribution of the new leads, the new sales, the new prospects, that kind of thing. So I hope this has been helpful. I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips, and this has been about the differences between a podcast in-house and a podcast you might do for a client. And then, of course, the benefits of each and why podcasting is a useful tool. Again, once you post these podcasts, they'll be out there forever. And they'll be really a valuable source of leads if done the right way. And if for any of your questions about doing podcasting the right way, visit us at www.adbriefings.co.uk. Go to the contact page and ask your questions. If you're not already a part of our newsletter, be sure to go to the newsletter opt-in page there and opt into the newsletter. I would love to hear your questions and your success stories. Thanks for listening. I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips.